to the public. Members, you're all very welcome. Can I remind you to switch off mobile phones and electronic devices other than the tablets provided by the Assembly for use with the electronic committee packs. Agenda item number 1 is apologies, and apologies have been received from the chairperson. Members, any additional apologies? Agenda item 2, draft minutes. You'll find meetings of the meeting held on the 29th of May at page 4. Are members content with the draft minutes?
Great.
Agenda item number 3, chairperson's business. At page 12 is an invitation from the department to the chair and deputy chair to attend a public stakeholder all-day event on Wednesday the 11th of June to discuss a DETI-led review of agri-food marketing and promotion. The chair and myself will attend the morning session, which is from 10 to 12. Are members content to note?
Great.
Our page 14 is the terms of reference for the Specialist Advisor on Economic Policy. The dates in the terms of reference have been amended as it was out of date, and they have been revised to include a review of the second Economic Strategy Annual Monitoring Report, which is due in the autumn rather than the first one, which was published last year. So to remind members that at last week's meeting we agreed to appoint Dr Leslie Budd as the committee's Specialist Advisor on Economic Policy. Are members content with the updated terms of reference?
Seems okay to me.
Great.
Have enough.
The committee is hosting an energy efficiency workshop with the Green Investment Bank on the 10th of June, which is next Tuesday. Registration is at 9:15 with opening remarks by the chairperson at 9:45. There's 4 themed presentations throughout the event, and the 4 of them are LED street lighting, district heating, education estate energy efficiency retrofitting, which is mainly building retrofit energy efficiency measures, and healthcare energy efficiency, which is mainly combined heat and power plants and biomass boilers. On table today for your information is an agenda for the event, and can I ask members, if they've not done so, to notify the committee office of their attendance. Move on to agenda item 4, an oral briefing from the system operator, SONI, on the part 3 of the electricity policy review on grid connections. Remind both members and members of the public that this item of business will be covered by Hansard, so electronic devices, with the exception of Assembly tablets, should be switched off as they may interfere with the recording system. In addition, can you please ensure that your tablets have been switched to silent? Papers for this item are from page 16 and include a brief from the clerk and Sony's presentation. Briefing the committee today are Michael Walsh, the Director of Future Grids at EirGrid, Dick Lewis, the Manager of Transmission Access Planning with Sony, and Robin McCormick, the General Manager from Sony. And so you're very welcome to the meeting. Robin, I presume you want to make an opening statement, and then we'll follow it up with the questions and answers.
Okay. First of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here again to give you an update on what we're doing, what we're responsible for. You have some slides that we provided for you, and I'll maybe just run over the first few of those slides, and then I'll hand over to Dick, and he can talk a little bit more about specifically about connections. We're the independent transmission system operator and market operator. I emphasise the independent because we're required to ensure that a lot of commercial businesses like generators have access to the network, and we do that in a non-discriminatory way. So we don't have any commercial interest in generation, we don't have any commercial interest in supply, because we have to make economic decisions about how generators are scheduled, and that determines what their income stream is. We were part of NIE up until 2009 when we were purchased by EirGrid. EirGrid are a company based in Dublin. They're one of the commercial semi-state organisations, and they basically did the same job as we did. It made sense because the electricity system on the island basically operates as a single system anyway, and we had previously worked very closely with EirGrid in setting up the electricity market and also in managing the flows on the transmission system. Changes since then. There has been a process initiated by Europe called the certification process, where each of the TSOs in Europe was certified. As part of that process, the regulators on the island, acting as the SEM committee, determined that Sony should increase its responsibilities and include the transmission planning function. That was a responsibility that NIE had up until a few months ago. And at the beginning of May, we took on that responsibility, and we brought over from NIE a group of staff who previously were responsible for that. We believe that that's a positive step forward, because it means that the planning function is now integrated with the operation of the system, and some of the issues that we would have from an operational perspective we can bring into the decision making on what is needed on the transmission system. So we're responsible for the safe, secure, economic and reliable operation of the Northern Ireland transmission grid and the all-island transmission network. We now make all the investment decisions on the transmission network, and we liaise and interact with the regulator for approval for that. We continue to operate the wholesale electricity market, which sets the price of electricity for every half-hour trading period. And we also are involved in dealing with connections to the transmission system. So if a large demand customer wanted to connect to the system, they would come along to us. We would provide them with an offer of a connection in the same way as we would with a generator. From a generating perspective, most of the generators that are connected to the transmission system would be conventional generators. We have generator owners at AES who look after the Kilroot Power Station and the Ballylunford Power Station, and ESB look after the Kilkira Power Station. And there's another single transmission connected wind farm at Slieve Kirk. The vast majority of the wind that's connected to the system is connected to the distribution system, which is looked after by NIE, but we have to manage the impact and the effects of all of that wind connected to the system. The individual wind farms and the larger size wind farms. So the second slide gives you a diagram of the transmission network. It doesn't have any of the distribution lines on it, and you can see clearly from that the demand in Northern Ireland tends to be over on the east side, and the power stations that feed into it are largely over on the east at Kilroot and Ballylunford. As we look forward, the majority of the wind that is connected to the is on the west side of the province, and therefore there's a need to build up the infrastructure to accommodate all of that wind. The network diagram also shows the folk who we would interface with. We would work, as I've said before, with the regulator. They run a price control process, so every 1, 3, 5 years we have to present to the regulator a business case for how we anticipate we need to run the business for that period of time, and ultimately they prepare a proposal back to us. So we're currently on a price control period that runs out at the end of September 2015. So when we go back and propose our business case for the next 5 years, we'll include this new responsibility for transmission planning and the capital investments that are associated with that. That previously would have been a task that NIE would have undertaken. We work closely with NIE because the transmission system is connected to the distribution system, and because of the range of connections that happen on the distribution system that impact on the operation of the wider system. So we have visibility of what the output of the distribution connected wind farms are, and we've got to take that into account as we look at the demand each day, look at what we forecast the wind generation output to be, and then we have to schedule the larger conventional plant around that. The next slide shows the connections relationships. So we'll just quickly cover that. The users of the system would be either generation or demand customers. We have a grid code that all users of the transmission network have got to comply with. The generators need to have a licence. A generator or a demand customer has got to pay a connection charge for the infrastructure that's required to link their site to the transmission system. and generators and suppliers pay tariff charges for using the transmission system. They're called transmission use of system charges. The regulator has got to secure income for both NIE and SONI, and they approve all the connection charges and the tariffs that result in money flowing from supply companies through to generators. On the transmission side, the regulator has chosen to operate in a manner that means that each transmission project is approved. The capital approval is granted for individual projects. This is something that has been the subject of a lot of debate through the previous NIE price control process, and it's yet to be tested in terms of our taking on the transmission planning role. From our perspective, we make connection offers to anyone who wants to connect to the transmission system. We have to liaise with the distribution connected generators and NIE to ensure that there's adequate capacity on the transmission system, and also in our role as market operator, these wind farms that are connected to the distribution system have got to register on the market so that they can gain their income from operating in the market. So we will look at connection offers. We will decide how best to connect the generator or the demand customer, and we will use the connection charges that NIE have provided, because they deliver the infrastructure at the end of the day, the basis for those connection offers. And as I said before, we then collect the use of system tariff, and then we have to pass some of that money on to NIE, who actually do the building and constructing of the network. That gives you a bit of a sense of who all the parties are and what responsibilities they have. On the connection activities page, you can see what the existing position is. We've indicated the sort of existing generator site connections in Northern Ireland. That includes what I've mentioned before, and the Moyle interconnector, which effectively acts as an input into our system. We currently don't have any demand customers connected to the transmission network, and as I've said, the vast majority of renewable generation is connected at the distribution system level. We have around about 580 megawatts of wind connected to the distribution system at the moment, which we have to take account of as we operate the system day by day. In terms of up-and-coming connections, proposed connections, there are some policies and processes that need to be finalised before some further work can be done. This has been brought about largely because of the difficulties that some of the developers had in connecting to the system, and also the offshore opportunities that exist. We have First Flight looking to build a substantial offshore wind farm off the County Down coast, and we have further offshore opportunities on the north coast. As we manage all of those things, there are standards that we've got to apply to ensure that everybody's treated the same, and that we can ensure that the transmission system maintains its integrity, and that we don't do anything that would compromise the security of supply to customers, which is significantly important. So that's an overview of the connection process in Northern Ireland. I'm now going to hand over to Dick, who will maybe give you a little bit more detail on what we do.
Morning, everyone. My name is Dick Lewis. I'm responsible for all island access planning. I just want to take you through some of the specific arrangements that apply, and hopefully sort of stimulate conversation later on. SONI is the party that, as Robin indicated, any generator wishing to connect in Northern Ireland must apply to us. To do so, they must provide certain specific information about the nature of their equipment, the nature of the plant, and that's as much to do with working out the impact that may or may not have on the system and on other users, and what's required physically to actually connect the party. So there's a structured process whereby the party provides information and Sony act on that information to provide the suitable connection arrangements. It's important when Robin mentioned standards, the standards that are met for existing customers must continue to be met when any other party is connecting. So a party connecting can't be to the detriment of existing customers. So that's a role we have in ensuring that happens. But fundamentally, Sony will provide certain information to a connecting party. They'll provide an offer outlining the proposed connection arrangement and the associated charges. They'll provide information around the contractual arrangements that the party will have to enter into to operate in the Northern Ireland and the Ireland market on the Northern Ireland system. They'll let the party know about the access that generator has to the system, and I'll talk a wee bit more about that, the term access, in a minute. If the access is limited, well then that impacts on their operating regime and on their payment regime, so that has to be known. And we try to give an indication or a forecast of what restrictions or what output reductions there may be for that particular generator. The charging arrangements in Northern Ireland are consistent with the same market, so it's an all-island charging arrangement, and it's described as shallow. So in other words, the connecting party only contributes to those assets that are required to connect it to the system. If there are other reinforcements required on the system, those costs are not paid by the connecting generator. Those costs are generally paid by the QoS customers in Northern Ireland. So where we stand at the minute, there's a large number of generators have connected. Some of them that have already connected do not have what we describe as firm access to the network. In other words, there's not sufficient capacity in the backbone network to allow them to export their full capacity. So there's already an identified need for infrastructure investment in Northern Ireland, and I think this committee has been made aware of that in different scenarios, different settings. There's a security of supply issue post-2015, which I believe you're also aware of. And there's a requirement for the north-south interconnector development and the restoration of Moyle capacity, and I'll go through that in the next line. So the structure of conventional generation in Northern Ireland is the three large plants that Robin referred to: AES Kilroot, AES Ballylumford, and ESB Kilkira. That's the major generation plant. That's the fossil fuel plant that feeds. So the network that exists there, when renewables aren't available, that's the plant that keeps supply on in Northern Ireland, and the grid is there to support those plants and indeed the renewable plant. So what we're looking at is a change in the portfolio of generation. So as Robin indicated again, we have the dual role now of planning the network to meet the needs of that portfolio, but also to be able to operate that system, network and generation effectively and efficiently so that security of supply standards are maintained. And we have a DS3 programme that aims to look at that, and that looks at the percentage of renewable wind we can have in the network, the amount of conventional generation we can switch off at any point in time, etc. And that's a programme that's been running now for a couple of years. The next slide, it's maybe a little bit busy, but what I wanted to show by this, as I said, the major generation plant is at sort of the Larne area and up in the northwest. The majority of the renewable wind is situated in the west. So at any point in time on the network, the amount of generation must exactly match consumption. So if I draw your attention to the circle, which happens to be around Omagh, I believe, any generation that starts there, if it's not initially consumed by demand in Omagh, it starts to move from west to east along the existing transmission lines. So we have to test, when I talk about access, there has to be sufficient capacity in the network to allow the generation to flow. So once it meets the local demand, it starts to move along the transmission lines to meet other demand as it goes along. So we test it in the locality to meet it. We then test it as it moves in the system. If there's still generation in excess of local demand, we have to look and test to see, can we export it on Moyle or can we export it on north-south? So that's the reason for the arrows are sort of using the system west to east, and then once all demand in Northern Ireland is met, can that generation be exported either to Scotland on Moyle connection or to Ireland on the north-south? And that's the purpose. So at every juncture, we're looking at an individual connection, judging the amount of other generation that already has access to the system and whether or not there's any headroom or scope for the new generation to use the system. And the rationale of that is to identify what further investment is needed on the backbone network to take it forward, and then only the investment that's absolutely necessary to allow that generation to flow in certain situations is considered. I'm referring here specifically to transmission charging. Passy, the next slide is all about the chargeability, and I'll go into that in some more. So within the single electricity market, there is a concept of shallow connection, and this, the aim of this is to be non-discriminatory to all parties. In other words, they choose where they wish to establish their generation or their demand, and that they are then charged based on that choice from that point to the nearest point on the network, the existing network. The customer pays 100% of that connection arrangement. And there's another term you've probably heard. The charge is the least cost technically acceptable solution. So in other words, it's the technical solution that's least cost is the charge that's levied on the connecting customer. The costs that Sony use to pass on to the customer are NIE costs, because that's the structure of the industry. NIE are the asset owner. They're the party that determine the cost of those assets. So we identify what is required, and NIE tell us that will cost X, and we pass that cost on to the connecting party. At this point in time, only NIE are the licensed party in Northern Ireland that can construct transmission assets. So all assets over 110 kV must be constructed by NIE. The process is contained and advertised in the Sony charging statement. That charging statement has been consulted upon and has been approved by the regulator. The network and connection arrangements must comply with certain standards. We already covered that, and that standard document has been in existence for quite a while, and it's actually under review at the minute. And furthermore, if there are deep reinforcements required to sustain the level of generation or to meet it, then those are identified by Sony, approved by the regulator, and constructed and delivered by NIE. And the cost of those assets, those deeper assets, are recovered through the use of system tariff, with money being collected by Sony and passed through to NIE. Again, process being regulated by UREG. So hopefully that's covered the arrangements for connection and what we try to achieve in dealing with them.
Okay, just to finish off, when I started, I mentioned the fact that we had taken responsibility for the transmission planning function, and we believe that that's a positive step. It's something that we would have advocated for some time, and we were pleased that the regulator identified that as a piece of work that needed to be transferred at the time of certification. So from the 1st of May, we've been responsible for that, and we're now taking stock of the plans that NIE had in place. We're reviewing those, and we will be taking the major transmission projects forward. So, for example, the North-South project would have been the responsibility of NIE up until the end of April. That's now a responsibility that we have. So it will go into the Planning Appeals Commission as a SONI project rather than an NIE project. The delivery of the transmission infrastructure, we've said it before, it's key, it's critical, it's important to meet the 2020 renewable targets. We have quite a lot of wind connected to the system. We also have quite a number of offers to connect to the system to allow us to meet those targets, but we can't deliver that to the benefit of customers without the appropriate infrastructure investment. The generation side, all generation greater than 5 megawatts has control links to our control centre to give us a facility to alter the output if that's required, and they operate within the single electricity market. The smaller scale generation, there are some issues around the amount of small scale generation that appears to be there. There's quite a high incentive through the ROCs that are available to single turbines, and I know that there's quite a lot of activity with NIE. The number of connections, the perception that the connection costs are high, and for us, when there's a large amount of wind generation which is sort of outside our radar, then it creates another concern for us in terms of managing the demand on the island. The changing mix of generation, we are moving from a system where we had conventional generation, which we instructed when it should start, how long it would take to warm up, when it would come onto the system, how much generation would be output at any point in time. We've moved to a much more complex web of inputs with distributed generation that we have talked about, the single turbines, wind farms, which are must-take generation. And as an island, we are sort of well ahead of the curve in terms of managing some of the technical difficulties that arise when you have intermittent generation on the system. And our DS3 programme is there to ensure that we balance all the needs of the system and we find solutions that other people haven't had to address yet, and ensure that as more and more wind is connected to the system, that we can run a safe and secure transmission system and continue to keep the lights on, which is important for customers, whether they're residential or commercial or industrial. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Robin. Gordon?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, gentlemen. I think we all agree we need to keep the lights on. Most economic cost. We've had several discussions here, you're probably aware, with various interests in the energy market over the last few weeks. One of the big issues that came to light is the time it takes to get these projects on the ground and the frustrations that have come through. One of the big things is about in relation to planning permission. Certainly on the larger schemes, it's our understanding that NIE, and I know you are not NIE, but you obviously work very closely with them, they will not get involved with the potential developer in any real sense until the planning permission is in place. What's your attitude towards that? Could you give us some information on that and your angle on it? There is an argument. There is this argument that more should be done in parallel. I understand smaller schemes run in parallel, but the larger ones don't, so time delays are built in that to us are unacceptable.
The planning permission requirement straightforwardly arrived because it was a neutral position, not imposed by the utilities, either NIE or SONI. As I indicated to you, I hope I indicated to you, there is a limited capacity on the network. Mm-hmm. So there is a requirement to queue. So everybody can't get access to the network all the time. So as parties were applying for connection, there was a need to identify when a party was in place and when a party was moving ahead to actually take up their access. So the planning permission was seen as a proxy for a date order queue of parties presenting themselves. So in other words, if you have been waiting or if you have been developing your project for a period of time, someone else should not be able to come in and get capacity that you've committed to. The acquisition of planning permission was seen as a proxy of intent by the developer that they were moving ahead, and therefore by accepting the terms of their connection offer and having planning permission in place, they were able to book that capacity on the network. So that is theirs, it's nobody else's. So in a situation where you have scarcity, it was a means of allocating that scarcity ahead of development. And similarly, as those parties connect with that planning permission, that date order is maintained so that you can then prioritise the transmission infrastructure reinforcements required to meet those parties' requirements. So you are effectively using the planning permission as a proxy for allocation of scarce resources.
So it's almost an assurance and a commitment from the developer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But in other parts of the United Kingdom, I understand it's not the case. It's not a requirement. Not strictly.
Not strictly. It was a requirement that evolved in Northern Ireland as the industry evolved, and it was seen as a way of allocating resources. Different parties. There's a different regime evolved in Ireland. There's a different regime has evolved in GB.
I understand your role has changed now. You have a greater interest in the whole planning process of the structure. So do you feel that it's something that you will be reviewing, this policy in relation to planning permission? Will you at least give a commitment that you will look at that issue?
Well, we are keen having. Well, we've always had responsibility for the connection process.
Yes, but now just clarify how your role has changed since April. I understand.
Since April, we will make the investment decisions as to what needs to be built on the transmission system to support any demand growth there is, or the combination of the distribution connected wind farms and any applications that we have for demand or generation customers to the transmission network. So it's basically the reinforcement of and development of the transmission system. We will be responsible for that. We will make the decisions, the investment decisions on projects that will lead to that. So the North-South project is a good example of a project that is required to benefit customers because there are costs associated with that customers are bearing at the moment.
Can I add to that smaller time? And you mentioned that there were delays associated with waiting for the connections, and Dick gave a very good overview of, it is a scarce resource, and when you have a lot of projects that are maybe trying to move out, when you do get to the point of planning permission, it's a very good strength that the project has a very strong chance of proceeding. There's an awful lot of, Dick mentioned the arrangements in Ireland, where at the moment we have a queue of 25,000 megawatts of projects in the wind area that want to connect. Some of them have offers, others are waiting, and that's over 5 times the peak demand on the island. So trying to work out which of those are credible projects, which of them are not, is very, very difficult. And in Ireland, I don't think we've done as good a job as has been done in Northern Ireland with the planning permission requirement. But you asked what commitment we can give to maybe try and deal with the delays, and I think one thing we'll be doing very clearly in our new role is we'll have a very good look at where there are areas like around Omagh where there's a huge amount of interest in developing renewable energy projects, and we look at what the network capacity between Omagh and the east of the province is, and see can we identify new investments that might help unblock that capacity, so that when projects do come along and have secured planning permission, that we will be able to maybe make access available to them quicker. I think on the other one, it's probably a broader policy matter than something that we can look at ourselves.
Yeah, the frustrations, were highlighted last week. We had wind farm operators here that the 10 years delay in getting connections, which is to us is totally unacceptable. And obviously there are various reasons. and there are obviously major modifications to be done to the grid and work to be done in that 10 years. But they said with overall it took about 13 years between the lead-in time and getting work done, and to make the final connection was 13 years. Now that's, you know, a very long time, and I understand developing any equipment and so on takes lead-in times and takes process times, but to us sitting here in Stormont, it sounds totally unacceptable. Do you see yourselves helping, now that you have this new role, do you see where you can try and make a real impact in relation to planning times and delivery of such connections?
Well, I think it's the onus is on us to look at how we deliver transmission infrastructure projects quicker, and that is a huge challenge to us, because traditionally it has taken a long time for transmission projects to come through the process, and those support the individual programmes of work that NIA will be doing to physically connect those generators to the system. So, you know, that is our job, that's our role. We recognise the challenge that it is, and we will look at the priority that's been given to certain projects to try and move that as quickly as we can.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Dick, in terms of the issue Gordon raised about the two-track process and the need to get planning permission first and then apply for a grid connection, has an alternative to that process been considered?
There's been a series of consultations, Chair, on the process, and it was about the term we use is firm access quantity. So a connecting party, as I explained to Mr. Dunn, was around a queue process. So as parties connect, they're allocated a firm access quantity, and that is based on first planning permission and then application date. So the party has planning permission. That evolved over a period of time, and the consultation period took, and I take Mr. Dunn's comment. It's very accurate. The length of time it's taken is unnecessary. The consultation process I'm referring to took 3 years. But that established a process in Northern Ireland, and that process in Northern Ireland also impacts on the connecting parties' remuneration through the single electricity market. In other words, if they have a firm access quantity, they're rewarded in a certain way if their output is reduced for whatever reason. So there's a linkage between what the network can do, the arrangement whereby the generator is connected, and the payments they get through the single electricity market. So to unwind all that takes a considerable period of time. The difficulty then arose because within the queue process with planning permission, you had different parties coming along that didn't quite match the onshore wind farm connection arrangements. There's a different sort of plant wanting to connect on Larne, and there's the offshore equipment that will have a different planning regime around it than the onshore planning regime. In other words, it's straightforward. Onshores, you apply for planning permission, the parties are there, they've been through the process a long time. The offshore parties are going to have to go through a different regime, different planning, different arrangements offshore and onshore. So where we are at the minute is we have one regime for onshore, which has been chugging along slowly.
Barry?
If we throw that up in the air and seek to revise it, that will create another hiatus on the whole industry, and there will be no progress because there's so much of the structure around this firm access quantity, remuneration, position on the network, backing up investment requirements. It has got us to a point in time where we can move forward. If we change it or break it at this point in time, we're into another 2, 3, I don't know how long to fix it.
But have you considered any alternatives?
There's a consultation process going on at the minute whereby we're looking at coming up with a hybrid solution where different parties may not require full and final planning permission before they can apply. Yes.
And would there then be a maximum or a time period where they would have to be connected to the grid, or they would lose that reserve capacity?
And any connection offer has a time period. If the connectee does not act within a certain period of time after acceptance of terms, the offer becomes null and void. So that concept is already built into offers.
What period of time is it?
It can be 5 years.
Okay.
So in other words, if you accept an offer now and you don't develop within 5 years, your offer expires.
That's 5 years after receiving
After
confirmation?
transfer, yes.
Okay. Sandra?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for coming to committee today. We'd been told previously by Action Renewables that the monopoly for grid connection was held by NIE, but that's not your responsibility. Is that right?
They have, NIE are the only body that can build the construction and do the construction. So they have a monopoly on that element of it.
Right. And, okay. But we have been told that in GB, in the Republic of Ireland, people can build the connections themselves. Is there a possibility of that happening here? It might mean that it
Yeah,
can be
that's-
built more competitively.
The word that they use to describe that is contestability. There's a new word for you.
Yeah.
And we would see opportunities for other people to be involved in the construction of assets. But there has to be the rules of the game have to change to facilitate that. And there are some complications in terms of NIE. You have to have some party that ultimately will take on the job if no one else does it. So you have to balance the competitive element of it with an assurance that it will be delivered ultimately.
So how could we progress that then, or who can progress that, or who can push that?
I understand it's in the regulator's forward work plan for consultation during this year, and that would be an arrangement whereby the regulator would bring forward proposals for how third parties would be suitably licensed, would have the legal ability to erect assets across third-party ground, etc. And then the concept would have to be that on completion of construction, to meet suitable standards, it would be handed back to the asset owner, NIE. That's the model that exists in Ireland, as you referred to, and it's referred to as contestability. So there are models out there that can be looked at, and as I understand it, it's incumbent on the regulator to bring forward those proposals.
And does SONI have any role in that at all, or?
Well, we would have to work within those new guidelines in terms of if there was a connection offer, it would have to go out to more than just NIE for a quote.
Okay. Do you have any indication of the timeline for this work by the utility regulator?
I believe it was to be this financial year.
Right.
One that's just started or the one that's over?
Yeah.
This financial year, this present financial year.
Referendum. Right, so a fair bit to go yet. Okay, thanks very much.
Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could cover cost of development. Now, a lot of the developers would come here and say, Simple Power being one of them, that if the NIE allowed developers to access their GIS system, their Geographical Information System, it would greatly assist them in actually being able to target areas where they could connect to the grid at the most productive cost. Why is it such a closed shop, and what's your opinion on that with regards to the access to that information? And why are NIE so guarded in that information when we've seen throughout the world, and particularly in GB, that information is accessible?
I can answer from recent experience. As part of the process of transition of the role from NIE to SONI, one of the areas of interest to us as the group responsible for planning was to get access to those same maps and information you refer to. NIE are happy to share the information with us as another licensed entity. Ordnance Survey are not. So basically we now have to submit to Ordnance Survey and get a licence or copyright permission for all Ordnance Survey based maps in Northern Ireland, which I understand is a significant sum because NIE's topographical network information is overlaid on Ordnance Survey maps. So there's a copyright issue, and there has been a copyright issue about NIE giving out Ordnance Survey information to third parties, and it's almost as simple as that. It's a cost. We're going to have to incur a cost in the region of $250,000 upfront and ongoing copyright fees.
But that's NIE willing to give you the information, and then Ordnance Survey is the stopgap or the.
Well, I wouldn't describe it as a stopgap, or I wouldn't describe it. It's a cost.
Cost.
It's a cost.
But are NIE readily accessible to the developer? They might give it to you because you're licensed and you have a role to play as Sony. But will they give that information over to developers?
I wouldn't be aware of what NIE's position is on that.
Right. What's the difference with regards to Ordnance Survey and mainland GB? Surely it would be the same system there.
I don't know. But I'm not aware of what the arrangements are in GB for sharing of information. If it's just network topography, that's one thing. If it's network on fixed geographical locations on Ordnance Survey background, well then there are other parties to consider.
Surely, and that's something we as a committee could look into, Chair, with regards to that, if Ordnance Survey is such an issue. The next question I would pose, which is begging to be asked, is why then is Ordnance Survey needed to be used? Surely a blank piece of paper with the grid and the information on it is suffice.
Well, it depends what you're using it for. If you're looking to identify equipment, and you're looking to identify routes, it's the geographical, the spatial information is absolutely critical. To plot that. If you're looking at a tower position, it's a tower position relative to a road to the Ordnance Survey background is what gives it its
But
Detail.
information.
in terms of capacity to the grid, we do publish a forecast statement every year that does include information on how much transmission capacity there are at different points in the network, but that's only, and that's publicly available, it's published on our website. That's only one part, as Dick mentioned. Look for a facility that I think the Ordnance Survey covers an awful lot more, but in terms of what capacity is on the transmission system, that is published on an annual basis.
With regards to the cost of grid connections, some of the presenters here to this committee has stated that the grid connection is between 20 and 50% of the total capital costs, compared to around 5% in GB and the Republic of Ireland for that matter too. How can you explain that? Why are these costs so high? Is it down to monopoly of one company who can deliver this?
Well, the charging statement is an approved document, so these are charges that NIE would have determined were appropriate, and the regulator has oversight of those and has agreed that those are reasonable charges. So I think it probably gets down to the specifics of individuals and the route that's required for them to be connected to the system, and I know that the regulator is keen for everybody to pay, the cost of their connection as opposed to an average cost, and therefore that may mean in some circumstances that an individual connection appears to be a lot of money.
And maybe just to add to that, Robin, I think those differences I would accept that I think the connection cost probably is on average more expensive in Northern Ireland than in GB or Ireland, but I'd be surprised if the differential was in the sort of order of the numbers you mentioned. One of the other factors to it is the amount, as Robin said, of what is actually chargeable. And in Northern Ireland, the policy is, as Robin mentioned, that if you're a generator and you're requiring, by connecting, that an amount of work to be done, the policy in Northern Ireland is that the generator is charged for all of that work. In both Ireland and in GB, there are other elements that are not maybe fully charged. So in Ireland, for example, if there's some remote work on a station 10, 15 miles away, you may not be charged for that. That'll be recovered through the general customer base. In Northern Ireland, the policy decision was if the generator is driving that cost, should be charged to the generator and not passed on to the general consumer. So that could be driving some element of it, but I suspect there's a number of different issues at play as well as that.
Some people have described it as deep shallow.
Yeah, deep channel. It's very, very clear there's a system there in play, and there's 100% of that cost goes to the developer with regards to the shallow connection arrangements. Is Sony, are yourselves content with the cost quoted by NIE and that they reflect best value? And how do you see them costs changing if there was a competitive field with regards to other companies coming in to construct grid?
Certainly, I believe Sony in its new role will have to be able to justify costs identified by NIE and challenge those costs as and when necessary. I see that clearly as our role. As regards contestability, as I would understand it, it's more a matter of a presentation of a cost that NIE would deliver the project for, and if the developer feels they can do it at a lesser cost, that's the developer's choice. So it's not like a competitive type arrangement. NIE would still have to charge a regulatory approved cost base. So I don't think it's appropriate that NIE could bring their cost to compete with a developer wishing to do it. It's giving the developer the choice to either have the utility do it at cost, or if they believe they can do it cheaper and do it to the standard that's required for the utility to take it over.
Yes.
So it's slight. I'm not sure if it's a directly correlating competitive situation.
I understand what you're saying, the two systems whereby it could be developer-led competition with regards to how much of the grid that they could actually install.
Yeah.
And then obviously there is always going to be this big brother situation where NIE control or not control but build the grid.
And I think the other very important factor is where you have a developer-led construct, they're much more in control of the overall project timelines. And coming back to the delay, I think that's a very important factor.
You talked about the state of flux and change and how that could bring delays into it. RP5's agreed.
Yes.
How much more change can RP5 take without bringing delays, or do we have to wait till RP5 is exhausted and finished?
Well, the process for RP5 is complete through the Competition Commission referral, etc. That didn't include all of the transmission investment.
Right.
So we have to take our plans for transmission investment directly to the regulator, and they will approve it on a project by project basis. It appears that it has a significant impact on NIE, and we will have to wait to see what our interactions with NIE are like, given the constraints that they now have.
How do you see RP5 being sailed? Are you fearful? Do you fret? Or are you confident that we can move on and adapt a system that's actually fit for purpose?
Well, we have had a very good relationship with NIE in terms of the need to work together with them to deliver projects and to operate the system up to now. So I don't anticipate that the commitment will waver. I think a lot of the issues that NIE have had have been on proposals that they have made for things that they want to do in the distribution network. So I would be hopeful that our ability to engage with them and to deliver things will not be impacted by what's happened on the regulatory side.
You talk about the grid being in the east, demand being in the east, and then west, obviously the demand for wind energy and everything else, renewable energy. But we have a situation where we have a tidal project in the north coast of Rathlin, and they, if that project is successful, they will have to connect into Kells, which is basically the length and breadth of the whole of Northampton. To me, that looks like failure. How would you describe it?
I wouldn't go as far as say they absolutely have to connect into Kells. Basically, if they connect into Kells, they would have more ready access to the higher voltage network. The network from Kells to Coleraine via Limavady to Derry Kilkira is 110 lesser voltage. So I think from the conversation we had earlier, if you look at it pragmatically, you either build to the nearest point, which is Coleraine, and you significantly reinforce the lower voltage network, or bring the higher voltage network further up the country, or you go straight to the higher voltage source Kells. And that could be a developer-led choice, because they would be the party paying the cost, or they could be prepared to pay the shallowest connection charge, which would be to Coleraine, and then you need to reinforce. There is no way 100 or 200 megawatts of renewable generation off the north coast can be consumed in Coleraine. I think the demand in Coleraine would be of the order of sort of anywhere between 10 overnight up to 50, 60 during the day. So it's just a magnitude thing. You have to get the generation to the demand, and it's not in Coleraine. So and as again, the corridor from Coleraine to Limavady is constrained, and there's already a number of other wind farm parties connecting in that area. So they have access to that network already. They have paid their money, they have booked their access. So along comes the tidal. Where does the tidal go, and where does it, Robin made a point earlier about renewable generation is must take. So to the extent possible, that generation gets absolute priority in the network. So we must allow that generation to run. So how do you separate, or how do you differentiate between two must takes? Does must take tidal get priority over must take wind? So you get into a whole complexity there, as I say. But I think it would be incorrect to articulate that they can only connect to Kells. Kells is certainly one of the options we're looking at, and we're in the midst of doing feasibility studies for the North Coast offshore renewables.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just come in, Chair, on one point, Paul, if it's helpful? Just one of those companies that were given evidence referred to a much bigger disparity between the Republic of Ireland and the UK in terms of grid connection with here. And would that suggest the need for further interrogation of NIE's costs, notwithstanding the utility regulators' oversight of them? I mean, what they're saying, Action Renewables is saying that the connection between 20 and 50% of the total capital cost, compared to around 5% in GB and ROI. That suggests somebody out there has a sense or a knowledge of a very significant disparity.
Yeah, I think we've identified the issues there. There's a difference between the way the policy has been applied in Northern Ireland and in Ireland.
Yeah.
And the charging statement is an issue for the regulator to be convinced on behalf of customers that those are reasonable costs. Mm-hmm. So those are the two avenues to address.
Yes, but I'm inviting you, do you think it should happen, that there should be further interrogation?
Just maybe one thing to, like, we'd have, obviously myself and Dick would have very good visibility of the costs in Ireland. Based on the numbers we're seeing, they're probably closer to 10-12% of total project capital costs would be the sorts of numbers we're looking at for new connections. Does that sound about right, Dick? Yeah. So that's why I mentioned earlier, I can understand that, yes, I think there probably is a difference because there are more items chargeable. And it's obviously, I think, scrutinising all costs in the system, it's a good thing. We all in the industry are committed to trying to be more efficient, and I think that's worthy.
But it's also about transparency, isn't it? I mean, you can refer to the fact that, the scalability of the work is slightly different or whatever, but does that transfer to costs directly? Is there a need for greater transparency?
I think, obviously transparency, but I think the contestability is the one that has, in Ireland and in GB, it probably has been the answer. Is ultimately, once you have the option of, if you don't like the cost that's been quoted to you, that you have the option of going and procuring someone else to do it. Because ultimately, once you have a monopoly provider, even with transparency, there's always an element of, is this the best value? Could you have procured something better? How are you doing your business? Could you have scheduled it differently? Could you have organised the work differently? What contestability does is it really opens all that up, that you actually have the option, if you believe there is a better cost out there and that you can do it in a more efficient way. It seems to have been the way that has been the best resolution of that issue in Ireland and GB.
And would you welcome that here?
I would, I think, yeah. I think it'd be subject to, it has to be put in a system that works and in a set of arrangements that are workable and practical, but it has been a positive development in the industry elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
In terms of the geographic information system that Paul raised, do you think that NIE should share that information with developers if developers can sort out whatever problem exists with Ordnance Survey?
Sorry, I'm speaking historically. NIE provide information with developers day in, day out for mark-up drawings for people working in the streets of Belfast. They provide information about where their assets are. They're required to do that. Yes. The issue has always been how they share that and the basis on which they share that. NIE presently use a geographic Ordnance Survey backed system, and that's the system they use. But they do give out for a developer working anywhere in Northern Ireland, they will provide information about working in the local vicinity and the electrical equipment. Yeah, it's a health and safety issue. So that information provides. So I'm not aware of what information developers claim they're not getting.
Okay. Well, we'll send you the answer of where they've raised that, and maybe you'll respond to us in writing with that.
Yeah, well, I can only reply from a Sony perspective.
That's okay, that's fine. In terms of the connection charging arrangements, you say they're aligned across the single electricity market, but is there much of a difference in the charging costs in the north compared with the south?
I don't think we've had an opportunity to really go through that in any level of detail yet, but it is something we look at.
Okay. In terms of RP5 and the final price determination, do you think that enough funding has been allocated to NIE to carry out grid investment in the near future?
Well, I think I mentioned before the process that they went through meant that the focus was on the distribution system charges that NIE have full responsibility for. If there are investments to be made in transmission, they haven't been included in that outcome from the Competition Commission, and it will be for us to go directly to the regulator and seek approval on a project-by-project basis for transmission infrastructure.
And have you went with any projects to the regulator yet?
No.
Why is that? Is that because you've only just took it over?
We've only just taken it over.
And did NIE bring forward many proposals to the regulator for upgrading the grid on the project-by-project basis?
I think there was a recent approval for 40+ billion for some.
That was the one to bring it up to 27% of the. Okay, but since that, there have been no applications, so the regulator haven't turned any down. Okay. Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Moving on to the grid investment and following on from the Chair, there's a feeling among some that the Competition Commission and perhaps the regulator put too much emphasis on the short-term costs to consumers. Now we know the utility regulator and the Competition Commission have a responsibility, sustainability, cost and security of supply, but there's a feeling that the balance has been struck wrong. What would your view be on that?
Well, it's hard to give a view on the distribution system. We're focused on to deliver on the transmission system, and I suppose we have got to test the regulator in terms of the investment that is required on the transmission system. So we have the plans that NIE had produced. We will be reviewing those, and then we'll be going on a project-by-project basis to the regulator, looking for approval for the development of the transmission system, and that has to be our focus.
The question I put to NIE last week as well. It seems very responsive, and I mean, in fact, it is responsive to say project by project what's coming forward. Presumably, you engage with developers, have some sense of what's coming down the line. We have a 40% target. maybe it's just my ignorance, but can there be a kind of proactive approach to the upgrading of the grid to get to a stage so as developers can come on and access the grid with foresight as to what's likely to come forward?
Well, I think that's the sort of catch-22. The regulator has taken a view that transmission infrastructure, because it tends to be lumpy investment, should be looked at on a project-by-project basis.
Okay.
We haven't tested that process, but it seems incredibly complicated to us to have to go on an individual project basis. We would have a view that the transmission infrastructure is a strategic programme of investment for a 25, 40, 50-year life, and that to do it on a project basis is micromanagement.
Okay, so it's not my ignorance. That's because that's exactly what I would think would be best to approach it. In terms of the challenges we're facing with everything we've talked about, renewables, etc., coming onto the grid, what is the potential for smart technology?
Well, we would recognise that from a transmission perspective, there's a need for us to be continually looking for different ways of doing things. And one of the benefits that has accrued from EirGrid taking over Sony is that we can now do that on an all-island basis. We can look at solutions, and EirGrid would have some experience of looking for new technology to be used on infrastructure to better utilise existing circuits. In other words, to upgrade a circuit route rather than build a new line. And there have been some new technologies adopted there, and there is potential for further delivery there, but we're not quite there with it. So there are things that we think we can do on the transmission system. We're working with industry to try to improve small businesses who have some innovative ideas and facilitating them in sort of pilot schemes and working with them and allowing them to draw some of our expertise in power system operation into their business development stream. Michael would have been involved in that. Do you have any?
Yeah, I think you've captured it very well. Like you mentioned there, we've had huge success in Ireland because obviously developing new transmission is very challenging for financial, social, all sorts of reasons, and our strategy is to try and reuse and upgrade existing network, and some of the new technology we've done has allowed us to double the capacity of some existing transmission lines without changing the physical appearance or structure, or having to essentially by just changing the wire to something that has a larger capacity. And you also mentioned Smart Grid Innovation Hub, which is a programme we have on the island of Ireland to try and encourage local businesses to come along and try out new solutions, new technologies. It gives us access to great ideas, that help us to do our business more effectively, but also it helps us play our part in trying to boost the enterprise, benefits that we're getting from this, because we're integrating renewable energy at a faster pace than many other parts of the world. We are using new technologies earlier, and they are the same technologies that are going to be required in GB in maybe 5 years, in mainland Europe and the US in 10 years. And people and companies that have the opportunity to trial those and interact them and prove them and hone their skills on them on this island will have a huge advantage in the future. So we've been quite proactive in going to industry events and doing open days and trying to promote it. We've worked with Invest NI, are actually on the steering committee of the Smart Grid Innovation Hub. So it's something that we're very positive about, and I think the industry are beginning to maybe show a bit more interest in it, and in Queen's and in the IT industry. So we're really excited about it. I think you're right to identify it as an area with huge potential. But a lot of the solutions that are coming through are maybe at a slightly earlier stage than we might have thought. So there's a couple of years' work with a lot of them to try and get them to the stage where they're ready for deployment.
Okay. I was quite nasty to NIE last week. I suggested, I can't remember my exact wording, but that they were conservative, afraid of innovation, and a barrier to progress. And that was picking up from different stakeholders.
Well, I think there's a balance to be struck here, because to facilitate that, sometimes requires access to money. So we need to have an open environment to promote some of that innovation, and that requires all the parties involved, the department, the regulator, and the utilities, to work together to try and find those solutions. You know, I think we have been pushed into an arena where we have got to be innovative. You know, the increase in wind on the island has meant that we have got to be innovative. We have pushed boundaries that other utilities haven't got to allow the amount of wind that's on the system at the moment. You know, so we're up for trying to be innovative. It's one of our core values to try to be innovative. To actually do it, deliver it, is a challenge to get people to think outside the box as we talk about it, and remember that we have got to keep the lights on. So we can't do, you know, ridiculous things. So we've got to try and think smart and do things smart.
And would you see
in the context of
NIE as a barrier in any way to doing that?
No.
Okay. You mentioned obviously the tidal projects and some of the challenges or progress that's needed in relation to those in the North Coast. What about the First Flight project? What challenges does that present, and are you confident that we can see timely progress in terms of grid development to facilitate it?
I would like to see timely progress on it. Again, there has been a degree of open discussion about the offshore arrangements in Northern Ireland. The regulator has determined that the existing arrangements onshore should apply to offshore out to 12 nautical miles. That brings to the fore the present utilities grappling with how they do, or can they do, or should they do offshore works. Because the result of the utility decision, the utility regulator's decision, in my mind, is that the connection point for the offshore wind is offshore. So that brings NIE into offshore assets, offshore asset ownership, offshore asset installation potentially, and that is yet to be resolved. We're working quite closely with First Flight Wind to try to come up with solutions that are potentially outside the pale of normal arrangements, and we're trying to push forward that envelope. But we keep bumping into policy, precedent, history. Some of the allegations you may have thrown at NIE would probably be apparent for the industry, because we do things in a certain way, and this is different. So I would like to think we're approaching it in as open a way as possible. We have been active in trying to bring the debate forward to try to get solutions. I hope First Flight Wind would say that as well if they have the opportunity. So yes, I would very much hope that we are able to meet timelines, but you should not underestimate physically where the First Flight Wind site is, and physically where the network is that it has to connect to. If you think North Coast to Kells is a big trick, East Coast to wherever is equally difficult, and you do have to always bear in mind when you're talking about these major projects, and potentially back to the very initial discussion. If you're thinking in terms of consenting and planning for the project, historically in Northern Ireland it has been a sequential exercise that the project has planning permission and then along comes the infrastructure. That's not going to work for the like of a First Flight Wind or a North Coast. So we do have to look at better ways of presenting the totality of the project and the benefit of the totality of the project, including the infrastructure. So that needs to happen. And if you look at the difficulty we've had with establishing transmission infrastructure in Northern Ireland and the public opposition to it, well, we can't ignore that public opposition when we talk about, you know, overhead line routes or underground cable routes or whatever across major tracts of Northern Ireland. There's opposition out there to whatever we may wish to do, and I don't think we should underestimate that opposition.
Okay. You mentioned the decision of the Competition Commission affecting, I suppose, the network decision that's going to have to be made. It'll have to be an offshore connection. What was it in the determination? Was it just simply is that a cheaper option? Is that what you're saying? Or was it a direction from the
It's a policy direction from the regulator. There's actually nothing. There's nothing in the competition.
Oh, right. Okay. So it was the regulator.
Yes.
And what was the rationale for that, or why does that throw up extra challenges than bringing it onshore?
I believe it does. Yes.
And what was the rationale, utility regulator? I mean, well, obviously we can put that question ourselves to the regulator, but from your understanding?
The options were to mimic the arrangements in GB, where they have the assets are provided by the developer and then handed over to an offshore transmission operator, and then it's connected to the onshore transmission operator. They looked at that option and decided against it, and decided that they already had a transmission system operator and asset owner in Northern Ireland onshore, and they could extend the present legislation to cover offshore. So that was the solution offered.
And
The outworking of that hasn't come to fruition.
okay. And you mentioned public opposition, and we are obviously well aware with the North-South interconnector, and indeed with some of the issues to do with wind farms, and particularly in the west. In terms of these offshore projects, is that anticipated to be substantial? I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying,
It's anticipated. It's not a reality yet, but it's anticipated.
okay.
You know, wherever we set our foot, there appears to be at this point in time. So we're mindful of that, and we're looking at ways to mitigate that, to get around it, and sort of come up with a much more open and transparent solution to getting those routes.
Okay. And just one final question, sure. NIRIG mentioned the fact that SEDWIG, or whatever it's referred to, the Sustainable Energy Interdepartmental Working Group, has not met in around 2 years. We've obviously got a review of the SEF currently taking place. Do you see that as a problem? And
They did make us aware that they were going to write to see if it could be reinstigated. You know, we are open to discuss the issues in whatever forum there is, and you know, it does make sense to have an interdepartmental forum where people can discuss energy matters. So you know, we're happy to participate.
okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation today. Can I touch on, we've talked about contestability, but can I touch on the competition side? We're being told that there's a monopoly being held by NIE for grid connections as part of the licence agreement. Would you wish to comment on that in relation to what could be done to open up the grid and open up the market for better competition?
Well, I think we've probably covered that under the discussion around contestability and where the facility could be made available to.
Could you expand a bit more on that? Yeah, and just tell us what you really see as a way forward here to get the market open.
Well, I think there's a process that you've got to go through to give people the opportunity through a consultation process, which I think is what the regulator intends to do, so that there can be a discussion between interested parties to put their views on it. We certainly would be open to the prospect of contestability, and if that drives prices down, all to the good. We've got to make sure that there is a delivery mechanism that supports that. So ultimately there has to be a body that will deliver infrastructure.
Would you like to see this coming out more open, into more open competition?
Yeah, I've said that we would support the introduction of contestability.
Yeah. Okay. Another issue, and you've touched on it in one of your slides, you talk about the delivery of interconnection capacity in the North-South interconnector. Can I ask you how important is the north-south interconnector for security of supply post 2015?
It's hugely important. You know, I think we've all recognised the importance of grid infrastructure, and particularly the north-south project. Because we have the single interconnector at the moment, there are costs being accrued by customers because we can't run the market as efficiently. We can't run generation as efficiently as we should be able to if we had further interconnection. So it's a must. You'll be aware of some of the problems that there have been in trying to progress it, both north and south. There is progress being made at the moment with trying to get it into the Planning Appeals Commission schedule, and we would anticipate that would be in schedule early 2015 here. There are a set of circumstances in the south which have delayed the application going in for the southern portion of it. But from our perspective, it's an absolute must. I've talked about some of the issues we have at the moment. Post 2015, those issues get more focused because some of the generators in Northern Ireland are proposing to retire generating units because they'd have to spend extra money on them to comply with some of the European legislation. And we're in the process, working with the department and with the regulator, to try to close that gap and to look for additional generation capacity to cover the period from the end of 2015 on until the north-south interconnector is built. So we're at a stage now where that has just gone out to a number of interested parties to tender for that, and we'd hope to be in a position by early autumn to be able to secure a contract for the generation to cover that shortfall.
Yeah, you have touched on problems in relation to progress, and planning is one of them. In relation to planning in the south, is there a bigger issue down there in relation to progressing the planning and even to getting into a sort of a fast-track situation with the government in the Republic? Do we see a difficulty there? And that,
I can take that. I think it has hit into a hopefully a hiccup in the very recent past. We have been, as a company, we're completely and utterly committed to the project. It's an incredibly important project for short-term security supply in Northern Ireland from 2015 onwards, but also for customers on the island of Ireland into the long term, for energy security on the island. It's probably the single most important project you can conceive of on the island in terms of transition development to improve matters for consumers and for the industry and for competitiveness as a team. Through an awful lot of discussion this morning, it's again a project that will enable much better competition, not just on the island but even within the islands of Ireland. It will allow the East-West interconnector and the Moyle interconnector to have better ties and better operation from GB to this island and allow the whole market to operate more efficiently. Onto the issue we've run into recently, it's to do with the classification as a project of common interest under European by the European Commission, and we were working on the assumption that the work we had done would be classified as transitionary and we would be allowed to proceed and lodge it into planning. At the moment, that's not been allowed by the European Commission. I do know we've been pushing quite hard in EirGrid, and the Irish government have been very committed in trying to help move that and been very supportive of the importance of the project. But it has been classified that we do need to go back and look to see if the application as it currently stands does meet with those requirements. We're hopeful that will be the case and that the delay won't be unduly long. But we were maybe at the early stages of working through and seeing exactly what we have to require to. We're very disappointed as a company that we have run into this delay, but it is our utmost priority to try and move this as quickly as we can and get a situation where we can lodge a very strong planning permission as early as possible. But it is very unfortunate that we've run into this delay at this time. But I can assure you it's not due to any absence of commitment or urgency or importance on our side.
We could be in a situation of more hope than anything then if we don't get this pushed forward with Europe and the Republic. If we manage to get this turned around, will the government in the Irish Republic, can they get this fast-tracked to get this moving quickly?
Well, it is,
We're in a situation now where there are issues. Are these major issues that are these seen just as a blip here? But are there major issues?
that's what we're working on, the hope, or the assumption is a blip. But even in the worst, like, it is a procedural matter. It's not a fundamental matter to undermine the project or anything like that. It is just a series of new procedures that need to be gone through before we can submit the planning application. The risk with not doing it is that the planning application gets challenged and falls, and ultimately then you would run into a much more substantial delay. So we're just being very careful to make sure that we don't leave a weakness in the application that an objector could take advantage of. In terms of the fast track, it is a strategic project, so it will be heard by An Bord Pleanála. It's a single one-stop shop. There's obviously an amount of time it needs to go through, but it will be a strategic project. Once we submit it, it goes into a very rigid timeline. There's an openness for people to come and to consult, to make observations. There will be a public hearing on it, so it does go into a fast-track process in the planning appeals as soon as it's submitted. What we're doing at the moment is just making sure that once we submit it, it's legally robust and it does cover off all the requirements of the project of common interest that apply to it.
Obviously, there's a certain amount of time. Have you a view on the timescale that would take to even get to get it to the stage where you're talking about here, where others can say they're supportive or otherwise? You must have an idea of some timeline of where you need to aim for.
Well, I think we are at the very early stage. Like, it has just been designated, so we are at the very early stage of just working out exactly what we need to do to make sure. Like, the big risk to us would be that we do it too quickly and leave a weakness there that causes a problem in the planning hearing, because then you're...
But what is too quickly, Michael? What do you mean by too quickly?
I think we're talking in the order of months. That's months. Probably, we're talking in, and best case, a short number of months, but it could take us a bit longer than that if we have to do more substantial work.
Would it be a year or more?
We definitely hope not. No, I think we're aiming...
It's difficult to be prescriptive about timelines here when it's external bodies are hitting the pace. We are concerned about it.
There's certainly a big concern here. Yeah,
we are meeting with An Bord Pleanála to understand what the process is to go through, the steps that need to be taken to get it back on track. It's the nature of these projects. There are hurdles you've got to get over, and at the moment the northern portion is sort of in a holding position. There are clear issues in the south that equally could flip across to the northern side once we get into the Planning Appeals Commission process.
We hope not.
But we hope not.
Okay, Spigation, thank you for your comments on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. With regards to the interconnector, surely there's somebody within EirGrid that would have a bit of an understanding how Bord Pleanála works and give you some advice on that.
I think there are. Like, we have one of the people that do it is an ex-inspector from Bord Pleanála, and he's in chairing it, and our chairman obviously was the previous chairman of An Bord Pleanála. The projects of common interest are a new requirement from Europe, so it is working with them to understand what are the requirements. So North-South has been through a certain process up to date before the PCI regulations came into place. And what we need to understand with An Bord Pleanála is how they're going to interpret the PCI regulations and say, yes, that this and this piece of work that you've done in North-South is all consistent with the PCI regulations. And if there is anything that is outside that, to understand that. So it's a new process that we're going through with them. But we are having good engagement from An Bord Pleanála, and there is good cooperation there.
And in terms of specifically of the North-South interconnector, do you accept that there's widely held political and community opposition to the erection of an overhead connector in the proposed area?
Yeah, we're aware of that.
Yep, absolutely.
And how are you proposing to manage those concerns and that local opposition?
So, for the part of the network in Ireland, we did a very substantial consultation process on a number of projects toward the end of last year. We got an awful lot of feedback from communities, and we've put in place a number of initiatives to deal with that. Some of them would include community funding. and provision of community funds along the length of the interconnector. Now, that's not something that there's a framework in place for in Northern Ireland at the moment, but in Ireland we believe that that is going to be an essential part of trying to mitigate to some extent the community concerns, but we don't underestimate the difficulty of bringing a project through like this through the planning process and the degree of public opposition that we may run into as we develop the project.
And in terms of the reviews announced by the Department of Communications, Energy and Natural Resources in the South with regards to Grid West and the other proposals, is such a review going to take place on the North-South Interconnector?
There was a previous review by the North-South Interconnector where the government in Ireland, or the Dáil set up, and the Oireachtas Committee set up an independent panel to look at the underground option for North-South. So that process has already actually been done for the North-South Interconnector. So there's no plans to go and redo that process.
Just refresh my memory, what did that international expert panel say?
It concluded that the cost of an underground, I forget the exact number, it was of the order of 3 times the cost, I think, was the exact conclusion. It gave a range for an underground solution. And we've also identified one of our big concerns would be the underground solution would have to be a different technology and one that would not give the same quality of service or capacity. So you'd essentially be paying 3 times the price for a service that would not be as good. And for North-South in particular, the ability to connect up to 2 parts of the island and have them working as a single system is what delivers the substantial cost savings to consumers, and that those savings would not be available to the same degree from an underground solution.
But did that differential in price from, I think it was €170 million to 590, did that include impacts on land and property values?
I don't believe that it did, but I would need to double check that.
And do you think the erection of the proposed North-South Interconnector would have a detrimental impact on land and property values in the region?
No, like we've done, I suppose, a number of reviews of this, and there's a number of estate agents that have looked at it, and the evidence that seems to be coming back would indicate that no, it doesn't. And you know, the community funds I mentioned earlier are largely to deal with disruption through construction activities rather than any devaluation of land in of itself.
In a hearing in the Oireachtas, your chairman actually acknowledged that there would be that pylons could affect the value of properties, and that it was an issue that needed to be addressed. So, on the one hand, we have your chairman saying that it will impact or could impact land and property prices, but then the international expert panel looked at this issue, didn't factor those figures into the price determination, because it's a fact that landowners and homeowners will have to be compensated. I think EirGrid have actually come out and said that they'll have to buy property to make this a go. So is it not actually in your best interest to go and look at the proper business case for doing this, instead of relying on half doing the job and not looking at all the information that's available?
Well, just even on just to take it back maybe to the Grid Link and Grid West proposals, where we've maybe looked at what way we might do it, the sorts of costs you're talking about for compensating landowners buying land where you are going, say, within a very short distance of a house, you're probably adding low single figures of the percentage of the overall project cost. So it's not that you're going to you're not going to bridge the gap between overhead and underground through those costs. They will. Yes, they are an important consideration in the overall analysis, and we don't want to dismiss them, but they're not likely to be a material factor in that discussion. You are talking about of the order of below 5% of total project costs for compensating landowners. Like most of the costs of an overhead transmission line are the physical structures, the conductors. It's very it's very expensive electrical equipment. It's very high technology. It has to be robust. It has to deal. You're trying to build an asset that will have a 40, 50-year life. That'll be very reliable. That'll be very robust. That'll deliver high capacity electricity. So the main costs of the project are captured and included.
And is there any reason why, of all the work that's been done to date, there's been no work carried out to assess the potential of putting it underground as part of the A5 N2 road development that's going ahead?
Well, I think that the work of the independent expert panel did, what it looked at was, and again, I'm not I haven't read the detail of that in the recent past, so forgive me if I'm not completely clear on the detail. But what it did look at was the cost of the HVDC solution, and it, as I understand it, it made the assumption that a favourable route would be found for it, and it looked at the cost of converter stations, the cost of the cable. So again, it was working on the assumption that a favourable route would be available for that delivery. So I think it was predicated on the basis that, you know, there would be an easy route available, and whether that could be a new motorway development, a road development, whether, you know, there can be sensitivity. Sometimes road authorities don't like you going through it. Sometimes cross country can be easier. But as I understand from recollection, the independent panel assumed that a suitable venue would be available for the site selection of it. So I think that was. I don't think it. That's my understanding of that analysis.
But is it something that's technologically viable to put it down ducts that are going to be along the side of a main arterial route?
For a solution of that, you wouldn't be, you know, of that magnitude, you wouldn't be putting through existing. It would be a new installation. It's a fairly substantial cable installation. You would be putting it down. Even the trucks that carry it are huge. It would be a new trench. You'd have to look at having it properly insulated, separated. So it wouldn't be something that you'd be putting down existing ducts that are available for a line at that capacity. On the technical feasibility, it does come back to the real issue that the underground solution would have to be the DC technology, which doesn't give you the service that you need in terms of bringing the two parts of the island together to work as a single system. And, you know, at the moment what's happening is, in very simple terms, if you have a loss of the existing north-south interconnector, the two systems will essentially start acting separately. And to make sure that both of them will stay secure, you need to keep enough reserve capacity in both parts of the island so that customers are not impacted by that. If you build a second north-south line overhead, then you've got the assurance that if there's an issue on either the existing line, the new line, or a generation facility on any part of the island, that there's enough there, and you essentially can reduce the total amount of reserve that you need to keep, and that has huge amounts of savings in running costs for operating the power system. If you bring in a DC line, it doesn't respond in the same way. It needs an automatic control system to do it. And there is the risk that, you know, these things happen very, very fast on a modern power system. There's a risk that you will not get enough response, and it will not be able to have the two parts of the system operating as one. So the technology that is coming in won't give you the service you're looking for that delivers the value and the savings to customers that an overhead solution would. And that's probably the biggest technical issue that we would be concerned about for an underground solution.
Was that reflected in the international expert panel?
I think it was.
They only look at cost.
Well, they looked at, like you mentioned the cost there, they looked at the installation costs, and they compared it and found that on that basis, and they made reference to the different technologies that would be applied and the different characteristics of the technologies.
I don't think they
they quantified that in detail.
The operational issues that would arise from an HVDC solution.
Sammy?
Thank you, Chair. I had a number of questions, but most of them have been asked and hopefully answered. I suppose just one quick question. Hopefully there hasn't been an overlap in this one. A number of people have come to this committee and have talked about the investment in the grid. And the question has risen, who should be responsible for that investment? So would you have views on that? And secondly, what is your experience in other countries in terms of investment in the grid? Who would generally tend to pay for that?
If I've picked up your question correctly, the investment that we're talking about is reinforcement of the network and facilitating all of the connections for renewables, etc. So it's the higher capacity transmission network grid that would traditionally be paid for through a TSO function. So the model that we now have would be common across Europe, and ultimately customers pay a tariff to cover the cost of that over the lifetime of the investment. So what we're doing here wouldn't be any different to generally what's happened right across Europe.
That's what happens in Europe, so you're saying as well then, Robin?
And the issues that we have described here about delivery of large infrastructure projects they have similar difficulties to the ones that we have described in terms of actual delivery on the ground.
That's my question. Thank you.
All right. Unless there's any other question, I think that's it. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Members, we move on to agenda item 5, which is an oral briefing from the department. This item of business will also be covered by Hansard, so your electronic devices, with the exception of assembly tablets, should be switched off as it may interfere with the recording system. And please put your tablets on silent. Papers for this item are page 29 and include clerk's brief at page 30. And the presentation by the department has been tabled. Briefing the committee today are Jacqueline, take a seat there. You're up. Briefing the committee today, we have John Mills, who's the head of the Energy Division. I think this is your first time briefing the committee as head of the division, so you're very welcome to the committee. And we wish you well with your role. And Michael Horace, who's the head of the Renewable Electricity Policy Branch, who has been here before, I think. So you're both very welcome to the meeting. So do you just want to make your introductory comments, and then we'll get into the questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the invitation to the committee's review on renewable on grid connections. We've sent up some bullet slides, so hopefully committee members have those. And I propose to go through those. DETI's main role is incentivisation of renewables, and that's pretty much what I'll be covering. So turning to the first slide after the introduction, the framework for renewables is set by the Renewables Energy Directive at EU level. This places a mandatory target on member states, 15% by 2020, and the executive's contribution to that is 40% renewable target by 2020, with interim 20% target by 2015. This is supported by the department's primary goal of protecting consumer interests, and also its general duties contain a requirement to promote energy mix, so that supports the renewable objective, and the detail are set out in renewables obligation order. The main way that we incentivise is through the Northern Ireland Renewables Obligation. Actual connection is largely due down to NIE, and the slide shows the legislative provisions for that. Turning to the third slide in the pack, just to give some background, 2008 All-Ireland Grid Study commissioned by DETI and Southern colleagues in the Department of Communications, Energy and Natural Resources concludes that 42% of power demand on the island could be met by renewables, but there would need to be some grid strengthening to achieve that. Current levels of investment are estimated to be able to deliver 27%. Turning to the next slide, we have approximately 600 megawatts of renewable energy installed. Most of this is large-scale wind, but about 10% is from small-scale technologies such as wind hydro, anaerobic digestion and solar PV. It's estimated that we'd need about 1,600 megawatts to meet the target of 40% consumption from renewable sources by 2020. Moving on to the next slide, which is entitled Since 2010. We are not...
Just sorry, on your previous slide on what's easy at nurse was on this heading renewable electricity, figures don't add up, if you know what I mean. So it says that we currently have 600 megawatts of installed renewables,
Yes.
which is 19%, but we need 600 megawatts to reach 40%. those two figures don't correlate. Is that because of a predicted change in demand or consumption?
I think part of it will be the actual technology mix itself, because installed capacity, well, wind would have, say, a lower load factor than biomass or AD, so they don't actually correlate exactly to terms of the 40% installed capacity. And actually, the 1600 was a scenario that looked at, you know, what could get to 40%, but ultimately it'll be depend on what is installed, whether it's wind or another technology. But they don't, you can't match them up the same way.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting you, John.
Okay. Sorry, yes, we have, I should have finished there, that we're not far off the 20%, as you said, Chair, 19%. So the next slide, which is entitled Since 2010, there have been considerable developments since the 40% target was introduced in 2010. Installed capacity accredited under the NIRO has almost doubled, and the figures are there. And there has been a massive increase in the number of generating stations accredited under the NIRO. So in terms of installed capacity, that's the figure of 336 and 6 moving to 611, and the number of generating stations is the figure of 590, and then in 2014, 4977. Moving on to the next slide, which really just emphasises that point, which is the growth in the number of generating stations. There's been a 740% increase in the number of generating stations, an increase of 82% in installed capacity, and then going down, the vast majority of these are below 5 megawatts, and most of them will be even smaller at under 250 kilowatts. And the figures in the last two rows show just small scale on its own. Turning to the next slide, of course, this is that's quite an increase, and these successes bring challenges, hence the committee's review, no doubt. At the large scale, NIE has adopted a cluster approach, and some of this can lead to developers complaining about timescales. At the small scale, connection costs have risen, timescales can be longer or dependent on upgrades, or effectively not possible in terms of the capacity of the grid. At the smallest level, the thresholds for micro generation have reduced to comply with new regulations, and I know that's a concern for that group of developers. Minister is certainly not blind to this, but as I'm sure the committee is aware, there's no instant solution to this. Any decision to allow further investment in the distribution network to accommodate greater levels of small-scale renewable generation is ultimately a matter for the generator. But as the final bullet there says, the question of costs of upgrading the grid to consumers has to be weighed against the advantage in achieving the renewable target. Moving on to the next slide, looking ahead, which is the last slide. The department last year completed a review of large-scale technologies in terms of the level of ROCs, and will, under the statutory requirements of the Renewables Obligation Order, we're now reviewing small-scale generation, and we'll be bringing that forward to the committee in the form of a draft consultation document in the coming weeks. Secondly, we're looking at the cost and benefits associated with reaching the 40% target, and that study is ongoing at the moment. We anticipate work being completed by the end of the year, and that will feed into the mid-term review of the Strategic Energy Framework due to commence next year. In conclusion, the Minister is very aware of the grid connection issues and the issues which developers are facing. There's no quick and easy answer. Any wider investment solution which takes away costs from developers could put it on consumers. and obviously upgrading will take time anyway. Obviously, it's important that developers are aware of the grid constraints when they move to development, though we would say there are still many opportunities for developers to connect. And ultimately, our goal remains to achieve the Executive's renewable target at the least cost to consumers. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Just one question. Your initial comment, you said that DETI's main responsibility was for incentivisation renewables. I presume that's not DETI's main responsibility for energy policy?
No, that is in the context of connections, main. If you like, we're creating we're incentivising the demand for connections. Our main duty is to carry out our energy duties in the interests of consumers. But one of the sub-duties under that is to provide for a renewable energy mix.
Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, gentlemen. How much are you aware of the frustration felt by providers of, basically, large-scale renewable projects, the frustration about the time taken to go about setting up their projects? One issue that they have great concerns about is this issue of planning permission. Planning permission being needed before NIE really take them seriously and engage with them. Is there not an argument that we should be running the two in parallel? What is your attitude to all of this? How aware is your organisation of these concerns?
Very aware. The Minister regularly meets developers, so she's well aware. Even in the short space of time I've been in post, I would have met developers more than any other group of people. Very aware of the issues for developers, and I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but you know, because I have a lot of respect for the risks that developers are taking. But ultimately, in terms of our incentivisation, it is the provision of renewables obligations levels. You know, we're not guaranteeing a connection to the grid. That doesn't come along with that incentivisation. In terms of the planning issues, yes, aware of calls for that you could run planning and grid connections side by side, and it may speed up the process. I think my crude answer would be that if the grid is the block, then it really won't matter how quickly you get through planning. And certainly, I think you could get into, if you ran the two side by side, you might get into people making planning applications, not taking forward their development, and NIE closing down possible access to others. I don't know if you've anything about that, Michael.
I would agree with that, and I know NIE in its evidence did explain why they had adopted that policy, and so to try and avoid those instances where you have developers just trying to push ahead and holding up grid applications. So the queue process is one that yes, developers would get very exercised about, but it's one that I think certainly at large scale developers would understand why the queue is needed, and the regulator would agree with that process as well.
So we had evidence here last week about a large wind farm provider. It's going to take 10 years to get from the planning stage with NIE right through to the connection. It's taken 10 years, and prior to that they probably had about 3 years working planning the project. That's 13 years. Surely that's unacceptable, 13-year timescale on such projects. What, you know, I think the department needs to get real here, and NIE need to get very real. I think NIE are living in the past here. And what pressure are you bringing on NIE to move forward? Remind me of certain banks that used to be in Northern Ireland. Some of them have changed their name now totally. They're unrecognisable. And they've closed a lot of their places because they didn't move on. And we feel that NIE need to really step forward, get smart, and get things moving to meet the modern demands. And the requirements change so quickly. 13 years for a project is unacceptable. Totally unacceptable as far as we are concerned, sitting up here in the storm and trying to make things happen. Surely you would agree. And what is the department doing about this?
I sympathise where I think I have to come back to what may sound like an unsympathetic answer on that, which is there are risks for developers. I admire the risks that developers take, but there are those project risks. I would be wary about saying the department should assume all those risks. That what the department does is offer generous incentives. Other industries may look at the renewables industry and look at the incentivisation levels and think that they're well served, and renewables get first preference in the market. They get the market price. We're not giving renewables a guarantee of connection, and if we wanted to do that, I think inevitably you'd be looking at possibly increasing cost to consumers, and the committee, from its last element of its review, is well aware of the issues around pricing. At the very top level, where the only thing I'd add to that, at the very top level of grids which are regarded as having European significance, there are new European regulations which delegate authority to the department to try and corral all these processes that you're talking about, and to make sure they happen more quickly and in a more joined up fashion, though that only does affect about 5 particular identified projects and wouldn't extend to a normal wind farm. But yeah, I really sympathise with developers. I spoke to somebody yesterday and they showed me map after map and said this is where these are areas of special scientific interest, so we can't go there. These are areas of landscape is important, we can't go there, and these are the grid constraints, and so I appreciate the difficulties. But having said that, if we were being crude, we'd say we are likely to hit the programme for government target of 20%.
You are?
Yes, for 2015.
You're confident of that?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gordon. John, you kind of said it again there, that the department's only responsibility for this is incentivisation of renewable electricity. But if we go back and look at the Energy Order of 2003, which established the regulator, it states that the principal objective of the department and the authority in carrying out their respective electricity functions is to protect the interests of consumers of electricity supplied by authorised suppliers wherever appropriate, by promoting effective competition between persons engaged in or in commercial activities connected with the generation, transmission or supply of electricity. So the responsibility of the department is much bigger than just incentivisation of renewable electricity. The department has the same primary role as the regulator. It has the same level of responsibility. So for the department to sit here and say that your only responsibility is to deal with the incentivisation of renewable electricity is quite concerning from my point of view.
Well, I'm sorry it's concerning, but I think I would disagree with you on the department has the same responsibilities as a regulator. That I would say the legislation would make no sense if we were meant to do what the regulator does. Why would we have a regulator? The principal objective in legislation is set out, and it says when the department carries out its specific duties, that must be its guiding principle. Mm-hmm. So, and the department and the regulator will have, and NIE and SONI will have numerous specific duties littered throughout the legislation. Okay. And I'm sure we could provide a list of those, but it would take a while.
Sandra?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for coming to committee this afternoon. Now, in terms of connection to the grid by renewables, it seems they're a monopoly for that. We talked earlier about how in GB and the Republic of Ireland, generators have the option to build their own generators or connect their own assets, resulting in cost savings and reducing delays. The utility regulator is working to bring forward that. I understand it. And what's the department doing to ensure that this is brought forward as soon as possible and as smoothly as possible?
Well, that's the, what's that word beginning with? Contestability, I think, yes. We're aware of that. It is the regulator's responsibility with NIE to bring that forward. As far as we're concerned, there are not barriers to that in current legislative framework. If issues arise with us, we're happy to look at them, and I think we'd certainly be happy to see that. If it help developers, it would be a good thing.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about clustering, and how do you see that helping or hindering, when contestability is brought forward? Then clustering actually bring in delays again then? And how will that be controlled?
Yes, that would appear to be an issue at the moment, but I think there's general agreement that clustering is a good thing, and certainly in terms of costs, it is preferable to multiple individual connections, and I don't think there's any disagreement on that. But it does seem to be an impact on individual developers, that if the clustering's not happening in their area, that it's an issue.
No, other than I think contestability absolutely would be something we would support, and that would help any of those developers to move the projects along quicker.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If I can cover cost, and apologies, I had to nip out there to see a school from a constituency, so I missed your presentation, so apologies for that. And maybe some of this has been covered in your, and I do apologise. I don't know if you were in the room when we had the last presentation, but the GIS system that NI uses, the Geographic Information System that they use, a lot of the developers have said that if they had access to that, they can make an informed choice of where they actually place and base themselves with regards to generation, and where they then can make a business plan case as to where they tap into the grid. What's the department's views on that, and what more can the department do? I'm like a lot of MLAs who get very frustrated with the processes of government and the cogs turning very slowly. And it's not simply good enough for departments to say, well, that's a market-led thing, or that's somebody else's pigeon. What more can the department do in regard to this? And what's your view on that information not being released when, in other jurisdictions, that information is accessible?
Sorry, on the specific point, I understand that there is. I didn't know that it had not been released, but I didn't think there was an issue, and we don't have an issue with releasing, with the information being releasing, though it's a matter for NIE. Yes, to sympathise, anything that can help developers, given the complexity of stuff that they have to go through to get a connection, is welcome. On the generality of again, the department, I'll come back to what may seem an unsympathetic line. From an energy point of view, we're trying to get the 40% target, and even with the current problems developers face, we are likely to hit or I'm confident that we're going to hit the 20% programme for government target. And I say the department does provide incentivisation through the NIROC scheme. And there is preference in market for renewable energy.
But surely your target cannot be simply to be focusing on a 40% renewable target, because if that is the only thing that you're focused on, and we hit a 40% target and it hasn't been managed right and it's not manageable, and we lose some businesses because of the cost of that change, then surely the department should be concerning itself with the cost of energy, the system of energy, the way that it's delivered, and the lack of progress on it. And the fact that costs of energy and the cost to connect to the grid is absolutely unsustainable.
Well, the 40% target isn't. There is a caveat to the 40% target, which is at to achieve the 40% target at least cost to the consumer. So that is the whole issue. You talked about losing business. Yes, it is. From a DETI point of view, the Minister would like to encourage business, including renewables. Some of it's very cutting edge and is worthwhile in itself. I'm speaking from a strictly energy point of view, and I have to say the executive has decided that the 40% is the target and at least cost to consumer, and that is what we're focusing on.
Yeah, but why should the focus be on that simply? Surely the fact that we are sitting, as a country, sitting second highest in cost terms in Europe to our large employers who are finding it very, very difficult and increasingly difficult to keep below profit margins, and who are competing with their sister plants all over the world. Surely that should be alarming the department into action.
Well, I mean, many people would argue that we should be going much more slowly on renewable support because of the cost implications. The department, I think a lot of that comes from a slightly off the subject of grid connections, but that seems to emanate from a report by the regulator in March 2013 that large industry did face higher costs. And the Minister asked the regulator to carry out work which is ongoing and hopefully will be delivered within the next month on looking at those costs and trying to look at the reasons for those costs and to consider the allocation between customer groups of those costs and to look at scenarios if those allocations were to change. So that work's ongoing at the moment.
To get back onto the cost of grid connection, developers would tell you that it's between 20 and 50% of their total capital cost, whereas in GB and our jurisdictions it could be as little as 5%. Surely Department and government has to have a bigger say in that. That's a truth that is going to hurt business, and that's not in the interest of any government that would happen. How more can the department delve into this problem to solve it? To me, it's not good enough to stand off and say it's market-led. It has to look after itself. We can just keep it running smoothly. What more can government do to bring the cost down, both for grid connection, and for cost of electricity?
Well, that is a matter for NIE and the regulator primarily. It's a matter of statutory record that they have the powers and responsibilities for connections.
So as a government, you're helpless?
Government can change policy, and the Assembly can change the law within the limits of the constitutional arrangement and the limits of what EU limits us to. We're not helpless, but again, you keep making me sound unsympathetic to developers, which I'm not at all, but we are hitting the current target. And I think the total ROC support for the renewables industry was 50 million in the last couple of years. And we are not guaranteeing grid connections. Yes, there are certain project risks that lie with developers.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel that with regards to the current status when NIE has a monopoly basically of grid connection and infrastructure? Should it be opened up to other suppliers, and then also should it then different guys? Can it be then that the developer can bring in people who will connect or do part of the grid connection and put a line up, a heavy voltage line up on their contract, and then NIE would take it over, or have through legislation, of course, they are the people who own the grid, so and control the grid, so they would have a fee then that everybody would pay into. Is that a model that government is looking at?
As Michael said, I think with support as Overend asked a similar question, I think we'd be happy to see that happen. As far as I am aware, there's no legislative constraint to that. If there was, we'd deal with it and hopefully support development in that direction if necessary, but we're not aware of anything at the moment.
Last question. What is keeping the energy team in Derry awake at night? What's the big issue for you? How are you dealing with it?
The lights come out.
For questions.
Yes, the light staying on is always a concern. Although it's regulator led, the movement to the new integrated European target model is a very complex change. Within the area of renewables incentivisation, we are moving to replace the ROCs system with feed-in tariffs with contracts for difference, and again that is very complex. So those are, and connections of course is a big issue. So those are maybe the four big issues identified, and just the complexity of some of them is what I find daunting as a new person.
And what more can you do better?
I think we could maybe try to be more high level, try and explain and understand things in less technical terms or less detailed terms, but that's very difficult. I think we join up a lot. Jenny, the regulator, and I have worked very closely to try and work together. I met people from forestry yesterday. So I think we can join up a lot better. Probably joining up and trying to be more understandable is probably my two aims on that.
Do you hope that electricity will be cheaper in the future? Or more comparable?
I may hope that, Mr. Frew, but
more comparable, maybe, is the word to put.
There is, we need to see the results of the ongoing review, particularly in light of the impact on large users of electricity, large commercial users, large manufacturing. The indications are that in terms of network, that's just of network costs. In terms of networks, the indications are that prices are comparable across the UK and Republic of Ireland. So I think it might be optimistic to look forward to lower costs.
Okay, Chair, thank you.
Do you see the cost and benefit study you're doing into the 40% target in the Strategic Energy Framework? Is there any logic for it being done now, halfway through it, as opposed to before the target was set?
Back in 2010, you mean?
Yeah. Why was the study not done before the target was set? And why are we doing a study now halfway through the framework?
There was work at that time which came up with the 40% target. Since the 40% target came in 2010, lots has happened and there have been lots of changes, and John has outlined some of those. So now seems to be, and particularly before we move into a mid-term review of the CEF itself, that the work that will come out of this will help feed in to that. I think to not do that work now, when so much has changed from 2010, would be wrong. I think we
was it done prior to 2010?
Well, there was work that was done, not to the level, I don't think, to what this review will do, which came up with the 40% target, but it wouldn't have, I suspect, gone into the detail that this study would go into.
And do you think it should have been done before the target was set?
Well, there was work done to come up with the 40%. I don't think that was a figure just plucked out of the air. So there was a...
You're less cynical than me, maybe.
A study done to do that.
Can we get Can we get whatever work was done to come up with the 40% figure to see where it came out of? If you don't mind, some stage?
There was a study done which has never been published, is my understanding.
It's kind of studies we like to see.
The committee done a report.
In terms of and I know this is about grid connection, so I'll not take it long, but in terms of incentivisation levels, as part of this review, is there any intention within the department to review levels of incentivisation based on the wider economic policies within the executive, such as the economic strategy?
The incentivisation in terms of the ROCs is I mean, looking at very much focused on the ROCs issue, and that's the support that's given to small scale generators, and that's intended to the purpose of the ROCs there was to take account of the different costs in generating electricity from renewables compared to conventional generation. So the review, there was a review done last year for large scale, then we're doing the small scale review. So that's looking at how those technology costs have changed since 2010, how they're likely to change in the future, and really has to make sure that we're not over or undercompensating any of those technologies on its own. But
But it doesn't take into consideration the wider economic strategies of the executive, because the regulator has released information saying that £17 worth of electricity can cost £180 to generate, which in the wider economic sense doesn't make any sense. Whereas large-scale renewables would be much more cost-effective for society. So, is there any consideration within the department of looking at levels of incentivisation to take wider economic strategies into consideration?
So I will look at those. As Michael said, there's the review that we're doing is under the renewables legislation, and it does focus us on the increase in costs and so on. But there will, I think you make a good point, Chairman, that it will look at wider issues, and the question of the cost of incentivising small scale against large scale is one of those that it will look at.
Okay, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, and welcome, John, to the committee and to your new role. Can I ask, if it's not inappropriate, what your background was before coming into the role in terms of experience?
Water for a number of years.
Okay, was that within DRD?
That was in DRD, so yes, familiar with utilities and regulation, and less familiar with markets and stuff like that.
It's always a bit of learning curve for these things, I'm sure, but no, that's grand. It's just interesting to know sort of your background, etc. Sedwick, as we affectionately know of it, the Sustainable Energy Interdepartmental Working Group. Our understanding is it hasn't met in something like 2 years. Was that a strategic decision, or why is that?
That is my understanding, that it hasn't met in 2 years.
Yes, there were a number of subgroups then that Sedwick had, and the work was being channeled through the subgroups itself rather than through the group itself. So that's where the focus was at that time. So Sedwick, in its wider sense, has never been stood down. It's still there, but the work is being developed through the subgroups.
And I mean, the group that raised concern with us was NIRIG. Have they been in any way excluded then from discussions because of this, or?
No, Sedwick itself was interdepartmental working group, so there was never industry on Sedwick itself as such.
There is the concern they raised was grid plan investment, the strategic side of it. Is that aspect is maybe falling through the cracks of these subgroups. Would you accept that, or could you even identify the subgroup where those issues are being addressed?
The grid, there was a grid subgroup. There was then the regulator set up the renewables grid liaison group, which included industry, and so there was, I think, a feeling then that there was a lot of potential duplication between those two. So the work seemed to have gone through there. Now that's probably more operational and we sit on that from an observer capacity, but we are still part of that group.
But we could look at that point. I mean, that's a fair point. We could look at if there's strategic,
and they
if it would help.
confirmed what they said, that it's operational rather than strategic, and that given the review of the strategic energy framework, I think that's where the concern lies. But I appreciate.
And NIREG, for instance, in our work on that, NIREG have been involved in meetings on the review of them.
We just spoke to Sony, as you know, and we spoke to the NIE, etc. And an issue that's come up that I find hard to comprehend, and it's a sort of policy direction from the utility regulators, my understanding, is that the grid investment is demand-led rather than strategic, so it's responsive rather than proactive. Somebody has to put in a bid, and then the approval for upgrade is granted or otherwise. Has the department any view in that approach? Is there anything? I mean, just speaking to Sony, they did, I think, refer to describe it as expressive frustration over that process. I think they know what needs to be done to the grid. They'd rather probably get on with it than wait until each individual developer comes forward.
I'm not sure I'd care to comment on that in particular. I mean, obviously at a very low level, then it obviously will respond to a particular connection. I don't know the context in which that was said, but
I suppose in Sony's sense it's the transmission, so the 110.
Yes, I wouldn't accept that there's no strategic approach to the grid. I mean, NIE's clusters are intended to look at, tended to take a more proactive approach in where the majority of connections might be. At an even bigger level, the Minister has done a lot of support for promoting the North-South interconnector, for example, and restoring the committee, and the committee has also supported that, and the Moyle interconnector, which will help. Promotion of storage is through a couple of European level recognised projects has been supported, and the Minister is very supportive of other more short-term storage to help with demand. So I'm not sure that there's no strategic vision there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously there's a Hansard of our previous meeting. So even if you could look at the Sony response to it was to a question of mine, and see if given what they've said, you would kind of maybe understand better their position. 420 million is what the current estimate is to meet the investment in the grid requirements to hit 40%. You mentioned your concerns: one, hitting the target, and two, that being the lowest cost to consumer. Are you content 420 million is the lowest cost to consumer? That I think that's, if I remember right, that's the NIE's own figures.
Well, I think we're getting back to the work we're doing to look at the potential costs and benefits, and that is NIE's figure, and I'm not in a position to dispute it, but I would like to see the result of our work to see what we get, and before saying whether that's the best figure.
The 19% renewable energy, the renewable electricity, you say we're at. What's that figure based on? Because I thought now, if memory served me right, the last I'd heard from the regulator, and I could be wrong, and this was that it was 17%. So I'm just wondering what the basis of the 19% on.
We receive monthly data from NIE.
Okay.
Which then will give us, break it down by technology, and give us a monthly figure, which then we will also convert into a 12-month rolling figure to give a better, because 1 month, we've seen months well over 20%, the next month could be down, so to try and give that rolling figure. So that's our latest figure that we would have. So there are I think some of it will depend on the point of time as well that figures are taken up.
So that 19%, is that average over the the most up-to-date 12-month figures?
Yes.
Or so it's not 1 month?
No.
Okay, and the target presumably is over a kind of 12-month period? is it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have had months that have been up 20, maybe 28%. We've had a single month, and other months might have dropped down. So you can't purely base it on such a short period of time.
And John, you mentioned you're confident of reaching a 20%, and certainly a 19% figure would be very encouraging in that regard. Obviously, there's a lot of decisions about investment to be made between now and 2020, but would you be confident that we're on the right road to 40%? Or are there any major obstacles that you see that we would have to overcome to make sure we get there?
Well, I think my civil servant answer is we'll wait and see what the review comes up with on the road to the 40%. I mean, there is going to have to be more investment, that's acknowledged. I think a concern has to be the progress of things like the North-South Interconnector, which will assist the grid's ability to absorb more.
The remit of the review, is part of the remit of that review to actually review the 40% target?
I think it would be for the executive to take a decision on that. I think we would say we're reviewing the costs and benefits of the 40% target. So what I envisage, you correct me here, Michael, but what I envisage coming out of it is that 40% will cost you this, and 30.
Okay.
For
Part
instance,
of it
if let's hypothetically take 420. If you got to 38% for 100 million, and it costs you an extra 300 million to get to 40%, the common sense thing to do would be to go for 38%. But I think more along those lines.
Yes, and it's looking at interim steps to, what to get the 25, 30, 35, 40. It'll look at it on those, and it will provide that data to us. But it's not just the cost, but the benefits also of reaching each of those interim steps too.
Okay, and to some extent, because a lot of this is obviously investment for the long term, what kind of time projections will be taken into consideration with that cost benefit analysis? So, for example, we know gas is the price setter at present when there's more required than wind can meet. Will we be looking at 30 years where we find that gas coming on the system, etc.? And is that the type of answers we'll be getting out of this, or is that too hard to answer at this stage?
It is concentrating on the 40% by 2020 target. I mean, the number of people have suggested we need to go beyond that.
Well, it's in terms of getting the full benefits of investing now. You don't make this 100 million investment for 6 years.
Yes, sorry, I see the point you're making, Mr. Agnew. We will. Obviously, if we just take 1 year, then 100 million will never be, never pay us back. So we will take that into account.
That's that long-term approach. Okay, one question just off the grid investment, and maybe something even that you can come back to me on. On the installation of the free PV panels, that we have a window of opportunity. Obviously, with ROCs decreasing, these become a less attractive investment for investors. We have a legislative barrier, it seems to me, in Northern Ireland. The banks are saying the legislation is different. So, for an example, you have Nationwide who will give the go-ahead for these free PV schemes, if I can say it, in GB, but they won't give the go-ahead in Northern Ireland because of they have greater risk due to different legislation. Is that something the department's looking at? Do you know?
Yes, we're aware of that, and the Minister wrote initially to the Council of Mortgage Lenders on that point to try and understand what their approach was to Northern Ireland, and certainly their view was that while they had adopted guidance for England and Wales, they were leaving it then to individual mortgage providers in Scotland and Northern Ireland to make those decisions themselves. And the legislation that you refer to, I think, is business tenancies legislation, and it's a piece of legislation with Department of Finance, and again, the Minister has written to her opposite Minister in Finance on this issue as well, as to what needs to be, because it doesn't just affect domestic, it has an impact also on businesses who might want to put PV on the roof of their buildings and lease it in the same way as domestic. So I guess that's something that we're raised with them.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sydney?
Aye, happy enough.
Sammy?
Thank you, Chair. Action Renewables came to this committee and they said that the monopoly held by the NIE on the grid connections is part of its license agreement. What is your view on that in terms of opening up the whole thing to competition?
I think, as we said, we support that, and my understanding is NIE are supportive of that as well. So we don't see any barriers and welcome that development.
Yes, I don't think anybody would be disagreeing with the
I'm happy enough with that answer, Chair. That's me finished.
We were told by one of the people that presented evidence from Action Renewables that 3, 4 and 5 kilowatt micro-scale photovoltaic or solar panels, the ones you see coming up on rooftops, that they're not being recorded in terms of generation. Is that true, and why is that the case?
My understanding on this issue is that, yes, and it's to do with they don't have half-hourly meters installed. Now, those micro generation technologies obviously get accredited and receive the ROCs, and PowerNI will offer them an export tariff for the electricity that's exported. So the generator themselves aren't disadvantaged in any way by that approach. And PowerNI, yes, are under their license conditions are required to buy that power from micro generators. I don't think PowerNI would say that it's given them any advantages on that, because it's a market issue. From what I understand about it, is that they're not seeing because it's not half-hourly metered, then they are not seeing the benefits, so they don't get the benefits back financially from that. Now, I understand that is being discussed. PowerNI have been talking to the regulator on that as to how it can be resolved. It's not something that's linked to the ROCs, and I say it's not inhibiting generators from that way. I think there is a view that maybe other suppliers aren't being able to offer a similar tariff and see it as an advantage for PowerNI, but I don't actually think PowerNI feel that it is something that they are advantaging from.
But can you be sure that the levels of payment for incentivisation are accurate with regards to the levels of electricity being generated from these panels?
No, they will. PowerNI will give them a tariff for that electricity. And that tariff that they give obviously has to be approved by the regulator, that they're giving an appropriate price for it. But I don't know any more really than that on that
But
issue.
you think it's something that's trying to be resolved?
Yes.
Okay. On another issue, Invest has informed the committee of a range of issues facing businesses as a result of grid issues and grid connection issues. I presume the Energy Division's aware of the discussion that's going on between Invest and a range of companies?
We meet with Invest and have done recently.
And you discuss grid connection and grid issues?
Yes, we have raised those, and often they'll get raised with the Minister.
Okay. And is there anything that the department can do to help Invest or these companies that are facing problems?
From an energy point of view, I come back to, I sound like a broken record, we come back to we provide the incentivisation, the specifics of any particular development is not something we'd necessarily get involved in. Any particular development.
Okay, no, that's fine. Unless there's any more questions, I think that's all we have for you today. So thanks very much for your time.
Right.
Thank you.
Members, are we content to commission a piece of research into the situation in Britain and the South about the permission and cost? I thought I had bad handwriting, Jim.
If I summarise what the committee said, the permission and cost of providing information on third parties via ordnance survey maps.
Yes, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
What about Stephen?
Yeah, just a few other issues coming out of the two briefings. Could we write to the utility regulator in relation to what Sony said in response to my question about the demand-led approach to grid investment, to outline why they have instructed that be how it's taken forward, as opposed to a proactive strategic.
I think they're here. Is it a fortnight they're here or 3 weeks?
Yeah, well, even if that can be.
So we'll put them on notice that you intend to ask them about it later.
Yeah, absolutely. And further to that, then Jim, the question about, I think if I understand it right, NIE's role being extended in terms of providing the offshore grid for the First Light Wind. The issue that seemed to be there that certainly Sony seemed to be unhappy with that decision. So again, just the utility regulator's rationale. I would have to check that and sort to get a definite question, because I didn't fully understand what they were saying. You know, it was a new issue to me. And one third issue, not for the utility regulator, but it just came up there on the business tenancies legislation, to ask, can we write to the DFP committee to see if that's something that they've looked at? The issue that it's preventing a barrier to households accessing free PV.
Numbers agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. Let us see them.
I think that's my list.
Get out of here for 1 o'clock.
Agreed.
Agenda item number 6, matters arising. At page 34 is a request from the Ulster Farmers Union. They give an oral briefing to the committee. Members have already received a written briefing.
What's in that relation to? Sorry, Chair.
Electricity Policy Review Part 3.
Oh, I see.
It's all to do with this issue, aye. So our members,
Great.
what are you agreeing to, Gordon? Or?
Move on.
Members content to advise the UFU that although the committee has a full schedule of evidence sessions between now and summer, members would welcome individual case studies where there have been major problems to help inform the committee's deliberation.
Great, get on with it.
Yeah. In gathering evidence for the electricity review, the committee has heard evidence from stakeholders who are concerned that the applications for planning and grid connection be allowed to be in parallel rather than in series. There may be a hoarding of capacity to developers, so our members content to commission research to ascertain the extent to which current policies in the South and in Britain are leading to a hoarding of capacity amongst developers.
Great, yeah.
At page 35 is further information provided by the regulator requested by the committee at the oral briefing of the 8th of May. Members content to note.
Great.
Page 47 there is a response from the department to the committee's queries to why there are differences in terms of office for InvestNI board members, or members content to note.
Great.
Page 48 is a response from the department to the committee's queries regarding the global audience of the Giro d'Italia. Members content to note.
Very impressive.
Page 50 is page 50 is information from Invest, giving up-to-date information on research and development expenditure and statistics as a follow-up to the briefing by Invest on the 15th of May on its end-of-year outturn figures. Members content to note.
Great.
Agenda item number 7, the Legislation and Solvency Amendment Bill. And papers for this item are page 51, include the clerk's brief at page 52. Briefing from Betty at page 54. Proposed amendments to the Insolvency Law at page 72. And the Insolvency Amendment Bill at page 157. Are members content to receive an oral briefing from the Department following the introduction of this bill?
Great.
Members content to commission Assembly research to develop a list of stakeholders for consideration by the committee and to determine how the proposed legislation compares to that introduced for England, Scotland and Wales.
Great. Is that the rest of the UK?
Told to ask if there's any comments. I'm not going to bother.
Is that the rest of the UK, yeah?
No, it's England, Scotland and Wales. Gordon, you might have heard tell of it one time. There's a consultation on the proposed withdrawal of approved codes of practice and guidance for rider-operated lift trucks, management of health and safety at work with gas pipelines. And papers for this item are page 206. and include the proposed withdrawal of approved codes of practice and guidance, and the annexes are available from the committee office. Members content to note.
Great.
Agenda item number 9, there's papers for this item are page 219 and include a consultation cover note and proposals for the consultation on genetically modified organisms and continued use regulations for 2015. The aim of the regulation is to provide a single simplified set of regulations. Are members content to note? Agenda item number 10, written briefing from DETI on the renewable heat incentive. Papers for this item are at page 243. The committee has requested that the department provide half-yearly updates on the 2 renewable heat schemes, and the update provided for today's meeting by the department provides an overview of the performance of the 2 schemes and the next steps. The RHI also form part of the DETI programme for government commitments, which will be considered at agenda item 11. Members content to note?
Great.
One thing,
Stephen.
sorry. My understanding was phase 2 was supposed to come in place this financial year, and then it seemed to be, I think the last I heard was end of June. Have we got an updated timescale from the department, or could we request one? Because there's no clarification unless I missed it in that briefing.
You an answer, Jim, or will we get clarification?
Station ended in October, I think.
Yeah.
No, as it's covered in the PFG commitments, and there's a suggested way forward in relation to that at the next item. So
we go on to the next item.
Yeah, that's fine.
Item number 11, the written briefing from DETI on programme for government commitments, progress report to the end of March 2014, and papers for this item are from page 247. Have members any comments?
Noted.
Within the clerk's brief at page 248, there is a suggested way forward that members may wish to look at. Page 248.
item 5 of that may cover.
Sorry, what paragraph's that then?
Paragraph 5, I think, is what Stephen was referring to.
Yep. Yeah, I would still add in that a timeline for phase 2. When do we, particularly when are we going to see a domestic RHI?
Yeah. Members happy enough?
Great, yeah.
Are we happy enough with the suggested way forward there, and that we follow each of those actions? Aye.
Is those 5 paragraphs actions then?
Yeah. I think that's clarification seeking from the department, is it?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem, yeah.
Happy enough?
Great, yeah.
Agenda item number 12, there's a written briefing from the Consumer Council on raising awareness of the new Consumer Rights Bill, which you'll find at page 257. So members, any comments or members content to note?
Great.
Agenda item number 13, the main estimates 2014-2015 and the budget number 2 bill for 2014. Papers for this item are from page 267 and include correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel, and a clerk's brief has been tabled. Are members content for the chair to speak in the plenary debate reflecting the issues outlined in the clerk's brief?
Right, yeah.
Agenda item number 14, correspondence. Papers for this item are page 274. From the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister regarding a briefing to that committee from the Human Rights Commission. And at the briefing, the Commission outlined a proposal by the NIO to make an 11.15 cut to the Commission's budget for the financial year 2015-2016, which you'll see at page 276. Are members content to note?
Great.
From the Department detailing the outcome of the consultation into the implementation of the EU Third Energy Package, or IME3, designation of provisions of the EU electricity and gas regulations as relevant requirements at page 278. The correspondence states that no substantive responses were received to the consultation, so members content with the Department's proposals.
Great.
From the Minister regarding an agri-food marketing review that the Department is to carry out as part of its Going for Growth Action Plan, the strategic action plan developed by the Agri-Food Strategy Board. Are members content to forward to the Committee for Agriculture and Rural Development for information?
Great.
Page 280.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that, through the DARD June monitoring round, they have put a bid in for 1.4 million to commence a pilot scheme on the effectiveness of what will be the Farm Business Improvement Scheme, which is the massive funding tranche within Going for Growth. And they've asked for, they've bid for 1.4 million in order to start a business pilot scheme. So again, it might be in order to write to the Art Committee asking, or the Minister asking for details around that bid and what that would be used for.
Members happy enough?
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Agenda item number 15, there's no tabled additional items of business. Do members have any additional items of business? Agenda item 16, the date, time and place the next meeting. The next meeting of the committee will be on Thursday, 12th of June in Invest in I, its headquarters, 10 a.m, and there will be no formal briefings at the meeting, but there's still a meeting.
Yes, Chair.
There'll be no formal briefings.